So Lihi, would you put in the chat the usual to say welcome and tell us where you're from?
Of course.
Okay, I've logged my answer. I'm ready to start.
Good job, Chris.
Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. We appreciate you joining us today. Today is a members and attendees webinar, follow up to the Resilient Renewable Planet Conference and Exhibition in London, our first in-person meeting in 3 years. We appreciate you being here, and we're going to try something new this time, where we hopefully get a little bit more interactive with the folks on the chat today. I'm happy to be here with my co-host and fellow R2P conference wrangler, the fabulous Lihi Rodham-Ganani. She'll have some remarks for you in a minute and give you some quick summary. Thanks, Lihi. What we want to talk about today we'll quickly, very, very quickly summarize some of the main takeaways from the R2P, which really are almost synonymous with advancing our newest and biggest initiative, the Human Continuity Project. And we want to get your feedback or your questions or your recommendations on those topics. So how do we get engaged today? We're trying something new. Usually with these webinars, we have kind of a panel of experts, and then the members and audience basically join us via chat to post your questions that we then try to relay to the hosts. Now, you can still do that during this webinar. You can post in the chat, but also if you would like to verbally ask a question, just use the hand raise function, and Lihi and I will be monitoring that, and we'll recognize you and unmute your mic. So we're keeping the mics muted mostly just because feedback and things like that happen. But so we want to do this in kind of an orderly way, and we're expecting about 75 to 100 folks on this call. So we'll selectively mute, but if you would like to ask a verbal question, just put the raise hand feature and we'll get to you as soon as we can. And as I said, if you want to just leave a question or a comment in the chat, that's also fine. I'll turn it over to Lihi now to give us a quick summary of the R2P. I guess it's a little more than I about said last month, but now it's June 1st, so a month and a half ago. Go ahead, Lihi. Thanks.
Time flies indeed.
Yes.
It was a wonderful experience, I have to say, after so long not being around humans, right? I mean, we moved to the digital world, and I can share my own experience that for me, it's the first time I saw my team members. So it was a hell of a summit.
You and I actually met in person for the first time.
The first time. Unbelievable. So we had over 50 speakers from all over the world. I think the most interesting thing was that we had a nice balance between people from the academia, people from the government, people from the private sector, the NGOs, and we try to keep that balance also during our panels discussions. Over 150 attendees, mainly from Europe and US, which was also a nice experience to see the type of conversations that we created there and how things work in one side of the world and the other one. I think we also had a nice addition that we had a good group of students, PhD students, that contribute a lot to the discussion. Now, the agenda basically was divided to 3 days, as you can see here. Our audience, our partners, Imperial College. We could not have done that without our sponsors. And this is a great opportunity to say thank you to our partners in Imperial College that 2 centers there were fully on board for promoting this amazing and important mission of the summit, and also US organizations and Israeli organizations, as you can see here. So we want to say again, thank you for helping us to do this amazing event. And then we built the agenda during 3 days, and what we started by presenting the problem. But this is something that we are very good at EIS, that we don't focus on the problems. We want to come up with solutions. So the first day we devoted to present latest challenges that the world has been managing. And the second day and the third was devoted to the solutions and how people could collaborate together to come to better solutions that if you just work solo. So today, and before that,
sorry.
That's okay. Today we're going to share some of the thoughts because we have on board, I can already see in the participants list, lots of people that participate in the summit. So it will be a great opportunity to hear their thoughts as well. And same for speakers and same for attendees. And if you missed that and you're not on this call because you went to London, you can watch it on YouTube. We have the 3 days there. Also, you can find a link on our website. You can go, I mean, this is a Teams, it's like a Zoom call. So it's not that comfortable, but you can find everything there if you missed it. So it's also free to watch. So I recommend if you have time to watch. And that's it, right, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. So
project.
Thank you. Yeah, and so as we discussed, most of the topics are really knitted well together with our newest project. So the R2P was a launching point for advancing the Human Continuity Project, which is a research and action collaborative. Again, our founding cornerstone organizations are ourselves and Imperial College London, but there are many others that helped us, and looking forward to continued participation from them and others. The opportunities to address some of these fundamental issues, as well as taking all of those that you see in front of us, putting those into a systems engineering type framework that we can really move and make substantial, real advances on addressing the black sky gaps that we've discussed in this forum and at the R2P as well. So that's going to be, those are the main takeaways from that we wanted you to have the information going forward and begin the discussion. I'm very happy to have 2 other folks, our leadership team that were with us at the summit. Scott Blevins, our technical director of communication systems, and our CEO and leader, Avi Schnur. So right now I'm gonna ask Avi first to make a few quick remarks, and then I'll ask Scott if he has any additions, and then we'll get right to the more open discussion forum. So Avi, take it away, please.
Hey, thanks, Chris. And I can't resist saying, I noticed something. The first slide that you used to introduce the Human Continuity Project subject, the image there was an adult and a child. You see their hands. I think that's really appropriate, and that's what it's all about. Sustaining our continuity as a civilization for the adults and for the next and future generations. So I think that was one of the clear messages that came out of the summit, first of all. And I have to say, it was rather surprising the clarity and vehemence with which really some of the most important leaders in different sectors in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel, and a few other locations, made it clear that things are changing and there's a problem. One of the electric sector leaders made the point that it's really no longer about will we need to do a serious full grid black start? It's going to happen. And the question is when. And very likely that's going to occur in consequence to a black sky event. So what we're really facing, I think, is kind of I'd call it a triple whammy. As everyone who's an inhabitant of this planet by now has figured out, we're facing steadily increasing threats and hazards out there. In addition, we now find ourselves going through a transition in energy resources in the grid. And that transition is occurring remarkably quickly and not really with comprehensive top-down policy guidance. Again, as one of the key comments that was made by one of the electric sector leaders, what we're trying to do as a civilization is to invert the energy pyramid. The most stable resources that we've used to keep the grid continuing and operational and reliable, basically gas, coal, and similar resources, we're trying to invert and take the pointy tip of the pyramid and put it at the bottom, where that becomes the resource that we use the most. But the fundamental idea is that when it comes to resilience, we are not at the point today where the renewable resources that we're all looking forward to are designed and capable of replacing, as it stands, the reliability functions, the resilience functions of what we've been using for years. Big issue, big concern. And then, of course, the third element of this triple whammy, which is the complexity of all sectors, is rapidly increasing. That complexity quickly becomes essential to the operation, not just of each sector, but all the others, because of unprecedented interdependencies. And so another speaker made the point, if you have a situation where you have a system and the complexity of the system is steadily increasing, the coupling, the interdependencies within the system are also becoming tighter and tighter. That system will fail unless there are systemic resilience capabilities built in. That's fundamental in systems theory. And that leads to the real message that I think the bulk of what we're trying to do at the conference focused on is, okay, we understand we have very serious problems. We really don't know how long we have. But the real question is, can we actually get out there and start doing something about it? That's really the opportunity. And I'll finish with this imagery. I spent a very large portion of my career in the aerospace world. And one of the things that I did is I ran a systems engineering department, which was focused mostly on building space payloads. And what you do in the systems engineering world in an aerospace company is you develop top-down requirements that start very high level and get into enormous detail to enable everything to mesh together. And then you do a very careful failure analysis, looking for both single and double point failures. Let me leave you with this. The interconnected, tightly coupled system that has become the fundamental infrastructure of our civilization represents a system far more complex than any space payload. And at this point, it's on us collectively to work together across the world to try to develop a systems engineering driven look at what are the issues, what are the potential failure points, how can we build in capabilities to protect our civilization from those failures. If this is important for an expensive space payload, I have to say, as a resident of the planet, it's kind of important for our civilization. And we've somehow scooted by without requiring this analytical approach up until now. But if you listen to the leadership from the regulatory sector, from the electric sector, from the finance sector that we heard at the summit, the time has come when we need to engage. So I'm very much looking forward to your questions today.
All right, thanks very much, Avi. Scott, I was wondering if you had any other remarks before we start taking some questions.
Yeah, just a quick summary of some of the stuff from the conference, and maybe some questions back out to the audience to think upon some of the questions I took away from it and some of the observations I made. First of all, it was great to have a conference of in-person after so many years. We had a lot of different groups there, I think, that are going to be important to what it takes to build the Human Continuity Project. We had some government and policymakers. We had people from critical infrastructure. We obviously had some people from education that not only hosted us, but also a lot of the students there, which will be your future leaders and stuff. So it's important to get those people engaged. And we had some people there with some of the technology solutions like Raphael and the BNet radio, which I spoke a lot about. I know one of the areas that we were kind of really missing in this that always pointed out several times is more engagement from the finance sector. Because that's going to become a critical piece in all this. So I would kind of throw it out to the audience as we go forward, just kind of a discussion point. Who all more do we need to get engaged with this? I mean, I think this was the right beginning core. Obviously, again, we had critical infrastructure, mainly focused around the power industry, but obviously there's a lot of other players in there. Some of the themes that came up quite often within this was how do we get to the policymakers to make policy changes? Because those are a lot of things that kind of seem to impede our ability to move forward with a lot of things. We see the problem, we recognize the problem, we say there's a problem, but then we run up into a policy hurdle. So that's one of the things that I really think that we need to engage in, and how do we work that better to make that work out? There was a lot of discussion about how do we get people to invest in resilience? If my competitors aren't investing in resilience and I choose to invest in resilience, does that put me in a weaker position from a profit potential? Obviously, it's going to put me in a better position in the black sky, but how do we companies and stuff to engage and to change their thinking and their mindset about that? There was obviously, when we're looking at human continuity and the things that can put us into a black sky, not only there are natural events, but there's also an element of warfare that we have to look at. So there was some discussions about warfare and how do we take the right appropriate measures in there to protect ourselves from both conventional attack and some of the more modern things that's dealing with space attack, attacking our assets in space, and also attacking us along the electromagnetic spectrum, both EMP and also in radio, which is obviously where I'm looking at it from on a lot of radio thing. And then finally, I guess one of the last things I throw in there is we had the ambassador from Nicaragua that was there. And it was nice to get that perspective from, not necessarily the most rich countries in the world that are looking at this, which most of the participants were from those wealthier countries. So how do we engage more of those other countries to kind of get that other perspective on this? Because, we're all in this together, and it's going to take all of us to work together to have an actual human continuity and a resilient planet. So those are just some of the things I would kind of throw out there to get people kind of thinking about as we move forward with our discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. I think that, so I haven't seen a hand raised yet, but in the chat, I think as you were talking about, so you pointed out, for example, flag the finance sector. Judy Clark pointed out that also needed in this conversation, insurance industry, communications, and emergency communications. So that's kind of a softball to you, at least for the last two, Scott. What were your takeaways or things that you're driving on in that balance between sort of the standard communications networks and the need for emergency communications? We talked about that quite a bit at R2P.
As far as communications goes, the issue that we have, and a lot of the like things that can create this black sky scenario and causing the power grid to drop and everything like that. What we are concerned with is a lot of these everyday telecommunications networks are going to start to fail because without power, they don't operate. So there's one element of that we have to explore. One of the other issues that we have to look at is when we look at attack, like from a warfare-based thing, electromagnetic attack, et cetera, that those things can, again, your everyday telecommunications networks aren't built to withstand that they're built to make everyday communications. So the problem is when it starts to become a large scale issue, not just like what we see within, and even though it sounds kind of weird to say, most of the disasters that we deal with, we have the ability to bring a lot of stuff from the outside in and a lot of other assets in there. And we don't have a lot of things like EMP attacks, et cetera, going on. And so we can bring that stuff in kind of the same way that we look at with the power grid, where when they go back to rebuild it, they can bring power from the outside in. But the problem is when we start looking at things at scale like that, we're not going to have that ability. And so that's why we've turned to look at other solutions on how can we position ourselves that can be EMP protected, doesn't rely on space assets, has the ability to harvest spectrum, which is the radio frequencies out there that will become available because the other systems are offline, and that we can use to support that critical infrastructure and that the government response agencies that'll be able to restore to be able to restore society and get things going again. And that's why, while we talked about the tools that are required, and one of the tools that we've really been working on hard is our BSX system. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I'm going to open up the mic to Brian Friedberger, who raised his hand. And Brian, if you can unmute your mic and state your question.
Hi,
or
it's actually
recommendation. Yeah, go ahead.
Chris, it's Bob Newman. I think I'm on Brian's link to this.
Oh,
but,
hi, Bob.
If I say anything offensive, blame Brian.
Okay, but, will do.
Avi, I wanted so bad to attend this, but unfortunately was not permitted to travel. But what you have reflected is something that Brian Freiberger and myself have been working on here at DHS for some time. We call them 5 supercritical infrastructures. These are infrastructures that you're speaking to around about that absolutely must be maintained following any disruptive event, whether it's natural or man-made. And those 5 are what you and Chris have been talking about, and that's power, communications, food and water, waste removal, and transportation. Now, these are just ones that we've put down. They are arbitrary and certainly can be expanded or contracted or what have you. But we have been working diligently to try to build infrastructure under this. To your point, Avi, with the systems engineering approach, these are the goals that we want to take or to achieve. These are capabilities. I kind of equate them to combatant commanders' area of responsibility in Department of Defense. But these, if they are maintained, and these 5 supercritical infrastructures would not, in our view, extend all to every household, but they would extend to certain command and control facilities, to hospitals, to police stations, whatever is deemed appropriate for communities. But we can't get this off the dime. And this is my real question, Avi, is because, to your point, this doesn't get any politician any votes. It doesn't make you front page news in the newspapers or online until an event happens. This isn't front page news now because we're all living safe, quiet lives. So my question is, and you posed it, Avi, but we've been unsuccessful. How can I get basically our political elite to look at this? We've engaged with congressmen. We've talked cabinet level officials. Everyone acknowledges this is a problem, and yet no one wants to take this on. And I don't think this is a challenge that is beyond our ability to successfully engage, but we just don't have that sense of urgency. And until we have people flying airplanes into buildings, no one cares about Homeland Security. And after the event, we all say, gee, why didn't we see this coming? My fear is, and I'll conclude with this, in this next event, it's not going to be 2 buildings collapsing. It's going to be society collapsing, because the next event, because of the interconnectivity of our system, our reliance on power for literally everything, we're going to be on our knees for a long, long time. So any thoughts from the gathering here as to how we can successfully engage folks that have the power to change the focus of our Homeland Security efforts? I would love to hear it and love to fly their wing and engaging with those people.
So let's see, Chris, shall I just jump in and try to respond?
Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, Bob, welcome. It's great to have you here. Sorry you couldn't make it. I would say 2 things. First, just to point out, there's really all the sectors, or all of the major sectors, are absolutely critical because of the interdependencies. And in addition to the ones you mentioned, certainly healthcare, certainly finance. That's one of the things that came up in London. Finance actually has sensitivity to GPS timing in the multiple millisecond range, and it is global in scale. And when you have a globally common systemic network, the risk that some big piece is taken out and the network fails represents what we've begun to recognize may be the biggest threat to civilization continuity. But fundamentally, all of the sectors need to get involved. And exactly the way you put it is precisely right. People are not used to engaging with a problem until it's really too late. The crisis has happened. The problem this time around, of course, being, as you point out, once this crisis happens, since it will likely involve an extremely large fraction of civilization, planetary-wide, it'll be too late to begin engaging. So the approach of the Human Continuity Project is not to begin with the political side, but to begin with a combination of operational engagement from the academic sector, from the corporate sector, from research NGOs, and get participation from pretty much every landmass on the planet, and looking to include people who have a real focus, organizations with a real focus on resilience and expertise, and also some of the very large corporations that by definition have global scale. And to bring in government agencies and regulators and in some cases, private sector entities as advisors. So they can watch this problem unfold. They can watch the collective best in class from the entire planet begin proposing explicit new approaches, new policies, technical solutions, and have a chance to get their ideas exchanged, comment on where the plan is going. And that conversation then can begin pulling, I think, all of the very best organizations in and begin driving this process. I think that's.
We lost Avi.
Okay, yes, I see Avi's a little bit frozen up, but we'll soldier on. I'm sure he'll reconnect or reemerge shortly. But
maybe we can take Emma's question from
really.
Avi's back.
Okay.
From the from the Science and Technology and DHS as an advisory member. We're going to be reaching out to government agencies around the world to do that. We need to work this together. There's no other way to do it, but I think we can. And I don't think it's too hard. And the consortium that will come together from across the planet to work on this will then seek funding from some of the world's really big philanthropic funding organizations, potentially to some government agencies as well. And we'll get this moving.
Yeah, one other thing to add that we started to discuss was that beyond all the key players that Avi just mentioned that can really work on the problem, I think that we identified the need to have to create a what we call the demand signal from the public. So I think we're going to be trying, and the folks that are on this webinar, listening to it, asking questions and engaged. So you're a minority of people. You understand it. You have had exposure to that, and you've made this decision that it's important. But the broader public has not had that experience yet, and so there's a bit of a gap on the public demand for action on infrastructure resilience. So that's another outside component that we wanted to talk about. I just wanted to tail in on Avi's answer there, but I want to go over to Lihi. You were about to take us to some questions, so let me pull in my co-host here. Go ahead.
I see Emma asked us a question in the chat. Emma, would you like to open your mic and ask, or you would like me to? I can just read. How could the Human Continuity Project best utilize social media to spread their message, get people, and particularly young people, engaged and putting public pressure on politicians? So maybe I can start.
I was gonna say, you're probably the right person to start this answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I promise to keep it short, as I teach my team to do on social media. This is a huge problem because the younger generation is very, very on board to everything that relates to climate change, for example, or buying sustainable products. But when we talk about preparation, it's very hard to grab people's attention because when you have time and you scroll on your social media, you look for nice things to watch. And the idea that the world is in a problem, if we're not going to do something about it, it's not so attractive. I think what we try to do, at least the past few years since we started to have more presence on the social media, is to give the people the sense of feeling that they can make an impact. And this is something that because if we will keep having the sense of feeling that, this is the government problem, I cannot do much, it's not going to lead to anything. And this is something we spoke a lot about in the summit, that as single people, we don't have a lot of power, but together we do. And social media is a very easy tool to reach to a broader audience. So this is how we use it. We try not to intimidate people, to educate them, to give them tools, and they could then join our efforts. I hope I answered the question. It was too long, in my opinion, but
no.
Yeah, and I just would throw something out there too. Like, we've been working on building our social media presence, making it more engaged. Again, a lot of this was meetings about having members and stuff, and so we're looking for your feedback. If you've got any ideas of maybe some things that we could add, or some just better ways to spread the message of the resilience out there in social media, we're open for any suggestions and stuff that you all may have.
Yeah, maybe I'll just comment as well. I think that's a fantastic example. That is a very good point, Emma, that you made, that social media is going to be critical, particularly to young people. A component of this whole project, as my colleague Udi Ganani has pointed out, and among others, is going to be, as we begin collectively developing planning, how do we market it? How do we drive it so that this demand signal, Chris, that you talked about, is there? So social media is one of those.
and the internet, good internet connection. It's crucial. Right, Scott? What do we do without an internet connection?
Exactly.
Okay, maybe we can take more questions from the audience. Let's see. Any hand raise? Anyone wants to open his mic?
I have a follow-up here that I wanted to talk about. First of all, Alan Asher, who was at the conference, is on the chat. His point is consistent with points I made at the R2P conference. I'd like to emphasize the need to incorporate some different thinking into the system engineering phase. As Avi was talking about, I think he was kind of responding to that point. It says currently policymakers and systems designers use a cost benefit of mitigation approach, which is kind of standard risk management activity. I think this needs to change to one of avoided cost of failure. And how do we accomplish such a shift in thinking? And I think this is kind of the point of like, how do we get the message out? The point here is when you want to invest in resilience, that's what you're actually, to make it make sense financially, you have to actually be able to capture the avoided costs of failure and really count those as an economic win. Like right now, we just don't do that. And so if you do something that's smart, like, I don't know, put in a fire alarm or a burglar alarm at your house or a fire suppression system, and then the action happens, the fire starts and your suppression system works and you save the house, but that doesn't ever seem to, outside of some reduction maybe in insurance rates, you can't really capture that avoided cost. And I think that's one of the areas that we'd like to see some thinking around this change, so that we can put that avoided cost dollars are captured in real dollars, and that those turn into resilience investments. So thanks for that, Alan. Sure, go ahead, Avi.
Yeah,
Yes.
This is in the name of resilience, my internet connection became unstable. So you're now hearing me dialing in by audio using my phone. But
All right, excellent.
We'll stick with the audio. Resilience is everything.
That's right. This is one thing we talk about in when we're talking specifically about the electric grid. We talk about the minimum grid, but this is a concept that's broader. So sometimes you have to fall back to kind of, it's not the perfect solution, but it's working. So we can hear Avi, we just can't see him. So we can carry on as long as there is some kind of reasonable fallback position. I want to try to keep going with some of the folks.
Ben and Richard, they both participated. Maybe we can.
I'm gonna ask Ben to go ahead and unmute his mic and join the conversation. Ben?
Oh, yeah, Chris, thanks a lot. I really thought the conference was absolutely excellent, by the way. You guys did such a great job, and it's about how we move forward. And, you know, I've only been looking at this for the last couple of years, but what I look at is when I have an emergency, when I think one of the things we got to accomplish is, because when anybody in Congress or anybody politically comes, what do you want me to do? And where do we start? And sometimes they see all the things that we're doing as just overwhelming, how many things that needs to be done. And when I look at that, I see really, well, if I have an emergency or something takes place, what do I do? Well, first, I'm going to call somebody and have somebody respond. If they're going to respond, they're going to have to get in a vehicle and they're going to have to come bring equipment, or food's got to be delivered, things got to be done. If you're going to respond, or emergency or recovery's got to be done, you got to have vehicles to be able to do that. And even to keep the grid up and running, you're going to have vehicles to go out there and repair them. So it's not just the vehicles, but the equipment that's in them has got to be able to work. So I always think the easiest way to get somebody to recognize, because we live in a very mobile society and a very digital society as well, is get people to recognize we're going to have to be able to move around. Even if the person is not even communications at beginning, emergency people that work in the emergency area, they will automatically start saying, I need to get out there and help somebody. Without even being told, they'll say, I need to go out there and help somebody. But if they don't have a vehicle to be able to do that in and have the equipment that's got to be operable to do that in, that's not going to happen. So to me, that's almost a fundamental. I heard those 5 infrastructure things, and I agree with each one of them. But and transportation was mentioned last, but really without transportation, the other things aren't going to be put back in place. Nobody's really going to be able to respond unless you can walk across the street. So, but my fundamental question is, what I want to hear us discuss is, how do we get those priorities established so people say, hey, what are we going to go do next? This is it. This is what we should do and what the priorities need to be done, because they just can't they see this big elephant and it's too much to bite off.
Yeah, let me put it this way. I think that's the biggest part of this project will need to be the systems engineering framed planning, which will need to begin looking at what are the critical timeline-driven priorities. What needs to happen first, second, third, fourth, and how to
The force is not with Avi today.
Well, one of the things I think that Avi was working towards on that is one of the other tools that we've been talking about and that we've been working to develop, which is our genome, which, you asked, what do I do first, second, third, fourth? How does all that interrelate and integrate together? And that's exactly the tool that we're developing, is to look at how do different decisions and things that I make, how does it affect the bigger overall responsibility? And it's designed for decision support. So I think that was one of the things that Avi was going to touch on while we're waiting for him to come back online.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was gonna point that out as well. It kind of tied into the idea of avoided costs. Well, if you can do something like with the ability of genome to look at these interconnections and how interactions between the infrastructures and what happens if certain ones go out and how they impact others and how you can do resilience investments. And if those are kind of robust models, you really can do a comparison where you can accurately capture the avoided cost, because you can look at various failure modes without actually having to go through one, so long as the model is certified. I wanted to pivot to Richard Rasmus. Richard, you should be able to talk right now. Go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, and it relates to the Genome 2.0 software that was discussed at the meeting. Which
Perfect timing. I love it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The time, the conference, and sort of relating also to the question of how to get younger people involved, and develop some grassroots support for this. And noting that one of the pillars of the Human Continuity Project is wide deployment of tools and capabilities. I'm wondering if there are any thoughts around proliferating exposure to and use of the Genome 2.0 software, integrating it with the EarthX simulation, and perhaps even developing something that is more of a consumer oriented thing rather than an expert oriented thing, something like a video game. There are lots of simulation games out there, and it would seem with some modification of that, could get people engaged in understanding cascading effects of infrastructure collapse.
Hey, Richard, you should have been telling us this about 2 or 3 years ago. Your comments are prophetic. We have gradually come to precisely the vision that you've articulated. And that is the direction that we're hoping to go. First of all, Genome 2.0 is not ready really for prime time. It's something that can be used by technical experts to see how the system will work and to continue its development and expansion. But what's really important is as it becomes expanded, it needs to become available to everyone. It needs to be integrated with EarthX to drive exercises. You're absolutely right. And I think this kind of these kind of ideas are fantastic. Volunteerism is excellent. We could also use volunteers who are good at copywriting, for example, to help prepare for and drive this whole project.
Thank you so much, Richard. I wanted to now recognize a new friend, a wonderful panelist from R2P. This is the first time we'd met, but he was fantastic. Temi Afolabi, thanks for being here. Temi, go ahead.
Hello, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. I just wanted to, I've got a question based on what Avi mentioned earlier. And I mean, I fully agree. The Continuity Project requires businesses, leading academic institutions, and corporations to work together and take the lead. But just reflecting on everything that's been said so far, which I think is really excellent point. I see a significant sort of universal global problem here, which is more like a wicked problem, to be honest. And we can't solve those challenges without changing behaviors. And I'm looking at this from a political policy perspective. And that's because all of these issues and challenges, they are interconnected in terms of how they vary. And I fully understand, obviously, businesses is where the real change needs to happen. In terms of addressing the complexity, ensuring coherence, convergence, and continuity, which is really important. But I guess if you look at this from a policy perspective, and I can see that from my perspective, there could be an urgent approach or urgent need here where there is interconnected approach across the global political sphere, and for governmental leaders or policy leaders to strategically consider, okay, what policy and regulatory levers are we going to pull to address the levels of risk exposure that we've got at the moment? I just wonder if there is something there to help sort of change that from a policy perspective.
Yeah, Temi, first of all, I very much, I think, as you know, enjoyed your remarks at the summit and your comments on getting past the blame culture as a critical thing, which relates to what you were just saying as well. Yes, you're absolutely right. I think there are going to be absolutely essential policy changes. The large bulk of those changes, government typically looks to private industry, to academia, to understand where policy changes can have highly leveraging impacts on corporate performance. And so I think the Human Continuity Project, one of the primary products will be recommended policy changes with regional differences in different countries and different regions of the world. And also to your comment on changing behaviors. I think the comment that was just made previously about using genome tied into becoming the core engine of EarthX, ultimately to become sort of the equivalent of a massive multiplayer online game, is something that can give people the opportunity to take a heroic role, and not just in a game which is all for pretend, but in helping to build their skills and capabilities and build resilience plans worldwide to actually accomplish something, and getting everyone involved as we build toward that capability, I think, is one example of how we can hope to help empower people to really change behaviors and improve the way all of us are addressing these extreme risks.
Excellent point. Scott, do you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned at the top of that, policy changes was a big subject and a big discussion that we talked about how do we change the policy, right? Because it is the barrier a lot of times towards moving a lot of these things forward. And, that's part of what we were just discussing a moment ago on this whole social media thing, this whole grassroots things, this whole how do we get people involved? Because who changes the policy? Politicians change the policy. How do we get politicians to want to change a policy? They have to have pressure to change the policy, or else, it's going to stay more stagnant. Where does that come? Well, that comes from pressure from the population that puts pressure on it, says, I want the policies to change. So it all kind of feeds into itself, being like Tammy talked about it being a wicked problem. Where do you start to solve this? And I think that's what the Human Continuity Project is about, right? Is to bring together the leaders, the thought leaders, the educators, the government people, the industry leaders, to start to look at that wicked problem and say, what piece of this do I need to start with? Or how do I start on multiple pieces of this to get to work together? As like what Avi was talking about, this being all, a systems engineering approach. How do I pick apart this wicked problem and figure out where to start?
Excellent point, Scott. Thank you very much. And thank you, Temi, for the question. I want to recognize Atul Patel. Atul, please, if you want to state your question, you need to unmute your mic. I noticed that you also put a couple in the chat. So if we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about other stuff like basics, putting the basics towards solutions. So please go ahead. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you, Chris. Especially, I respect Lee for allowing me for the conference. All right, you know how much it is important for me. I'm a diehard fan as a operational research. Okay, and thank you, Avi. Whatever you shared to me, it's very much important for the common people of this world. I respect that. Coming back to the my question, what I see in the entire event and today's conversation, there is minimal talk about artificial intelligence and cyber world, because those are the two worlds. I recently visited US. That's my first trip, and I've seen lots of things is happening digital way around. If you saw the currency transactions, everything is like everything is on the card, everything on the mobile, and these are the basic. These are the very vital economy perspective, and I see the in these conversations, you all are talking a lot about electricity. That is a big thing, electricity. But the small part, the cyber and artificial intelligence, is not communicated much in this whole conversation. And I acknowledge, Chris, what you said about the needed of the vehicles as well, along with the humans. Some operation instruments are also needed. And my question is how human factors, because I strongly oppose human factors. I'm totally a hardcore engineer guy, so I always talk about the machines, but not about the people who use it. And one of my friend badly told me that is important, and I realizing it from last 15 years. I appreciate. So I want to hear a lot about the human factors, because once we have the products, people don't know how to use it critically. We don't know when the next big thing are going to come to us. And really the people are trained. We've seen lots of chaos in COVID time, lots and lots. And especially I don't talk about the people who died because of the COVID, but I'm concerned about the people who were at the front face. They died. The front face warrior died. The people who were taking care of the other humans, they died. And that's my the concern. That's the biggest concern.
Thank you for your question, Atul. I think I see Anthony is here. Maybe he could give his aspect about the artificial intelligence, but I think that we touched upon that during the conference, the technology, the good side and the bad side, right? Because everything is connected. So maybe Anthony could open his mic and explain a little bit about artificial intelligence and how we take that into account now when we build, for example, a genome, and how this impact our work. Anthony is our main leader. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our webinar today. I wanted to, since I'm going to be diving in, I have a background in computer science. I got a PhD in it in 2007, and my PhD advisor is a fairly well-known artificial intelligence researcher who worked on neural networks. And what everyone is calling AI today is really neural networks. It's a very thin slice of the full spectrum of artificial intelligence that's getting a lot of press right now. And I kind of like to say, since I'm a bit, since I've been in this field, I've seen maybe 3 or 4, possibly 5 cycles like this, where something like AI pops up in the news. It gets a lot of excitement about it, a lot of worry. It's going to be the next thing that changes the world, or the next thing that kills us all, or whatever it might be. And then it fades away again, and then something else grabs people's attention, and it comes back again in 10 years in a different form. So I do think it's important to acknowledge the presence of artificial intelligence in the news and in our lives, and the changes it might bring to certain professions. I personally don't see it as the kind of existential risk that some people are making it out to be in the news. I think it's just another cycle, and that happens to be a story that is good for something, I guess, for business. So that would be my first point about that, since it's in the news so much. But as far as what we do with genome and where we see artificial intelligence playing a part there is, you know, we envision genome as a kind of digital twin of the real world. In other words, a digital copy of what's actually happening in the world. And when you have that kind of capability, and you know, there are many things you can do with genome that the previous commentators and Avi have brought those up. But as the computer scientist in the room, one thing that I find incredibly special and powerful about it is that if you do have a digital twin of the world, then you can do things in the digital twin and see what will happen before it actually occurs, right? You can sort of say, well, what would happen in this region if a big hurricane hit? Even though that's never happened before, maybe we would like to know what that looks like. Or what would happen in this region if a 9.0 earthquake hit, even though that's never happened, or whatever it might be. You can think, to your, whatever your creativity or fears bring you, you can run that in the simulation. You can run it thousands of times and see, would it be terrible? Would it be manageable? Would it be somewhere in between? Is there something that we can do to prepare in advance to make it less terrible if something like this were to occur? And so that would be something that we could do as people playing a kind of video game style thing, a large scale. But what AI can do is automate that and do it quickly, much faster than any individual person could do. So that, coupled with large scale computing resources like we have in the cloud, I think offers the ability to do some very powerful forward-looking planning of a sort we've never seen before. Simulate an entire spectrum of possible disasters in a large swath of the world in a massive, very realistic digital twin of the world where nobody gets hurt, and gather statistics about what the likely outcomes are and analyze those to see what are the weak points, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the interventions that might change that. Are the evacuation plans going to be adequate? Are these other types of emergency response plans going to be adequate or not? And answer those questions long before those things ever become problems. So that's the computer scientist in me getting excited about the possibilities. But I think when you take that down to earth, maybe that helps with some of the issues that others have raised in the chat, for example. Like, how do you get people concerned about these things today when they have comfortable lives today, when they're not suffering from the consequences of climate change yet, when they don't know what it might look like to have a large-scale catastrophe in their region because they've never seen that before? You can actually have them play a game like this or engage in it in a variety of ways, including in the AI-mediated way, and somewhat experience what that might be like, even engage with taking actions within it and see what that might be like, or look at large-scale statistics, whatever it is that actually engages their mind, because people are different in what they respond to. So that's kind of how I see artificial intelligence playing a role for us in genome, is providing this kind of large-scale testing and training and immersive experience capability that we just don't have in any sense yet. So I hope that kind of adequately addresses the comment and question without going too far off the rails.
No, that was great, Anthony. Good points, and we sum those up often. Our phrase we use at EIS Council is lessons imagined. This means doing something like a simulation, like a game that really can sort of be immersive and be something that you can learn from, but without the terrible consequences. And hopefully then you transition to real life and do the actions required to avoid those terrible consequences. We're right at the top of the hour. Avi, I'm going to ask you to
Chris,
respond to, go ahead, Leahy. Yeah, we'll go around the horn here. Go ahead.
That's okay. It's really quick. And it also refers to the question that you asked before, how do you reach the people? So we created for this summit more than 20 videos. Actually, Elchanan did very creatively. And those are small educational pieces. So there isn't a problem and how we can come together to solve it. So I highly recommend if you can help us share the message and also share those videos with your network, because this is an example of how there is a problem and there is a solution. And it's very simple to explain what to do, right? It's just, let's do it. That's what I want to add.
Thanks, Leahy.
So Chris, I will finish with a question. The introduction to the question is, after all of the years that we've been talking to many of you and to leaders in multiple sectors, the conclusion we did come to is that we need to work together across all sectors and across a global scale. That was what became the genesis of the Human Continuity Project. Here's the question: will you help? And that's a question for everyone and for those you're in touch with. And if people are willing to help, just get in touch with us and we will come up with an approach that will be value added either for people personally or for organizations.
Thank you very much, Avi. Excellent point. We want to, as you pointed out and Leahy pointed out, share this information with your network, be in touch with us, share your ideas. I appreciate, this was our first, attempt at a more interactive discussion like this. Everyone's comments and ideas were welcome, and there was a lot that we didn't get to. The chat, as usual, was its own discussion section where some of those we were able to bubble up into the verbal discussion, and others we weren't able to. Wanted to highlight that we are working on a new handbook about Black Start. We didn't really get too much into electric sector discussions today, but we'll keep an eye out for that. But as we said, those videos that Leahy talked about, these educational tools, that handbook will be one. Those short videos, though, are even probably more important because more people can access them. There's a handful of people in the electric power sector and in the government structure that works with it that need to focus on Black Start. However, there is, again, the demand signal with the public to say, we want to make sure that our electric system is resilient, that we want to be able to restart it fast if it goes down, that we want to eliminate outages. We don't want a black sky event to really happen. Those are the kind of drivers that we need. So once again, thank you to all my wonderful team here, Leahy, Avi, Scott, Anthony, thanks for joining. Our folks that tuned in and asked questions, thanks. I think everything was fantastic. I'll pause to let our CEO Avi say one last thank you and goodbye, and then we'll conclude the webinar. Avi.
Yeah, no, really, thanks so much for your interest in this domain. It takes a real sense of commitment and an excellent imagination to thoroughly engage with this domain. And by being here, you've made it clear that you have both. So thank you very much to all of you. And I look forward to continuing to engage with you in helping to drive this whole process forward.
And please reach out to us. We have on our website, there is an info mailbox that I make sure to answer everyone who reach out to us. And we are now creating this group for the Human Continuity Project, and every voice counts. So please reach out. And thank you for
thanks. Thanks everyone. All right. Talk to you all soon, I hope. Take care.